It's a wonderful opportunity, 41 years after meeting my student, to have an opportunity to give him a grade. How has he done? You see, I first went to Taiwan in 1961. The president-to-be was 10 years old.
No, 11.
Oh, 11. But even at 11, he wasn't perspicacious enough to see the future. And certainly I wasn't. Taiwan in 1961 was a demoralized dictatorship. It wasn't much fun to be there. People were suffering in many ways. And one never had a glimmer at that time of what might have happened. And what I want to start as the first question of the evening is, how did Taiwan develop in the way that has given us the Taiwan of today? What were the factors, internal and external, that enabled Taiwan and the people on the island to flourish and prosper and be so worthy of our concern? This was not a hypothetical question. You have to remember, when the U.S. established diplomatic relations with Beijing, December 15th, 1978 was the announcement, I believe. The question arose, what will happen to Taiwan? Will it disappear the same way South Vietnam disappeared after the American withdrawal from Vietnam? Some people thought this was really the product of Kissinger's vision, that there would be a decent interval between the U.S. withdrawal of recognition from the Chiang Kai-shek regime and its eventual collapse. But Taiwan didn't collapse. It has flourished. So I want to ask my former student, how does he explain it? Because he not only observed it, he was a participant observer in many different roles. Ying-jeou, 怎么样?
Well, it's really very nice to have this opportunity to be with Professor Cohen again. Well, he raised very interesting questions about the development of Taiwan, particularly after the United States switched recognition of China from Taipei to Beijing. First, let me remind you, when you came to Taiwan in 1961, it was the beginning of a very important period of Taiwan's economic development. We call that takeoff. The policy, as far as our economy is concerned, first of all, is import substitution, and then followed by export expansion. So in the 1960s, our economy has already entered into the takeoff stage. So by the time I graduated from National Taiwan University in 1972, our per capita national income, per capita GDP has already reached about 300. But by the time I left Taiwan and came to NYU, it's already 800.
US dollars?
Yes. And when I went back to Taiwan in 1981, it's already 2,800. So it went very fast because that was a period of relative, stable, particularly in the first about 30 years, the price of oil is pretty stable. That gave Taiwan an opportunity to develop itself. So we had a better chance to be what we are now as a result of rapid economic development. So at the time, people do feel the society isn't that free, but the major focus was on the economic development.
Well, that raises the familiar question, is there a period in every nation's development, certainly in East Asia, when dictatorship is good for economic development? South Korea raises that question. China mainland raises that question. One could even argue, I suppose, that earlier Meiji Japan raises that question.
Another interesting question is the change, particularly the change from an authoritarian regime to a democratic one. Took us more than 30 years, but it's a gradual process. According to Professor Winkler from Columbia University, it's a change from hard authoritarianism to soft authoritarianism. The first stage was represented by President Chiang Kai-shek himself. And then, when his son became the president, the society have already changed. For instance, we have martial law imposed on Taiwan from 1949 to 1976. When people think about martial law, they think about barbed wires, soldiers with their guns, and tanks rolling in the streets. But this is not the case in Taiwan. Even in the 1970s, we still have curfew in the harbor of Keelung, Xiaojing. But it was actually taken away as a result of protests from incoming ships. They had to wait for their place in the harbor for long hours because there was a 6-hour curfew from midnight to 6 a.m. So it was really taken away.
But it was really hard authoritarianism in the worst way. As yesterday, 228 reminds us, this was the 70th anniversary most of you are familiar with. This was a period beginning 47 when, in effect, the Kuomintang was seen as colonial rulers of Taiwan, with tens of thousands of people killed. So this was a hard situation. I'll admit it looked pretty harmless when I, as a foreign observer, arrived for the first time with my wife. It looked deceivingly peaceful. But as I got to know more and visited more often, I saw this was a very tough dictatorship, and it made me feel that at least until the Cultural Revolution, it compared seriously with what was going on the mainland.
Let me respond to questions that could that be raised. First of all, the martial law. It was imposed in 1949, lifted 1976. And I'm not sorry, 1987 is 76 is 民国76年. Yeah. So when it was announced by President Jiang Jingguo, when he met with the publisher of Washington Post, Catherine Graham, and sitting between them, I was the English interpreter. So I translate the whole thing in a very slow way to our guests. He said that after we enact necessary laws dealing with national security, we will lift the martial law and allow the establishment of political parties, including opposition. Well, I feel I was electrified because I knew that we are writing history. 2 weeks after the announcement, there was an opinion poll conducted by the China Times. It was surprising that almost 68% of the people didn't even know the existence of martial law because it would change already gradually. That is why when the foreigners study what happened during that period, they called it a quiet revolution. In other words, there was no fanfare, there was no much bloodshed. So that's what happened in our democratization process. But when you look at the February 28th incident, it was quite different. It happened at a time when the ROC government came to Taiwan, and the economy was bad, and there was civil war waged on mainland China that required a lot of materials from Taiwan as well. So it happened on the 27th of 1947, or when at a time there was as you know, the tobacco was under monopoly by the government. So with some people trying to sell cigarettes in northern part of Taipei City. And it was a dispute with them and the people who tried to stop them. And some of the police used their guns, not to shoot, but just to hit the head of the lady who was selling the illegal cigarettes. That incident broke out, and to an extent which cannot be controlled by the authorities. So he asked for the president, the Chiang Kai-shek, to send troops in order to quell the uprisings. And that was the actually eventually led to the killings. So you raised a very interesting question. Just how many people were killed during that period? In order to take care of the aftermath, back in 1993, when I became Justice Minister, the government already published a report which says that roughly about 18,000 people, they estimate, got killed. And they decided to do some reparation, compensation, and trying to restore the people's sort of rights. So I was just the Justice Minister at the time. Originally, the job should be done by the Interior Minister, who is, some of you know, Wu Bo-xiong. But he said it's not very proper for him to do that because his family, his uncle, is also a victim of the 228 incident. So he said he better not to do it for him. He asked me to do it. I said, fine, I'll be very happy to do it. Well, I'm glad 25 years after I made that decision, it was a very good and appropriate one. That gave me an opportunity to deeply into the whole incident. We eventually passed a law that provide compensation to all the victims from $100,000 to $6 million, all right? And so we set a deadline for reporting the incidents of cases of death or injury or detention, loss of liberty, whatever. And originally said 2 years, but obviously it's too short. So it was extended 4 times to 9 years. And even when I became president, I again extended for another 4 years. So altogether, it's 13 years for people to report whether they are qualified to get a compensation. So according to the last figure, it's 868 people dead or missing. 868, which is very different from the estimates in Taiwan by scholars, which use a demographic method to come out with the estimate. But after 13 years, though, most people, if not all, must have reported. Even we gave compensation to one Japanese, one Okinawan people, and one Korean when they were in Taiwan at the time. So well, I don't know. So the figures isn't that important because it's a question of human rights. It's a question of life and death. So but we have to figure out really how many were killed or missing. So according to the foundation established for that purpose, but maybe we could have more information after digging deeper into the facts. So I think that is a very, very important case for having what we call transitional justice.
Yes.
And
it's a problem that your successor will also have to deal with, and perhaps your advice will be very useful in trying to achieve some greater integration among all the people on Taiwan. I was struck by the bitterness, the vicious feeling that so many Taiwanese people who suffered from 228 and its aftermath felt. In 1962, one of my first students from Taiwan, I was teaching at Berkeley, came into my office with a tear-stained letter written in Chinese from her mother. And I said, "What happened? Did your father die?" And she said, "No, much worse. My sister married a mainlander." And it sounds funny, but especially to people, for example, who might be Orthodox Jews, if one of your children marries out of the faith, that helped me associate a little bit with the depth of feeling. Now, you work closely with Jiang Jingguo. To what extent can we give him credit for this marvelous gradual evolution that avoided violent revolution and led to the democratization of Taiwan? Should we give all the credit to Lee Teng-hui, his successor, the first Taiwanese to be president? Or didn't Jingguo himself initiate steps that helped clear the way?
President Jiang Jingguo was the first president to make that decision for Taiwan's democratization back in 1986. As I said, when he received the publisher of China, Washington Post, Catherine Graham, and that decision was made. So beginning from then, there's a series of measures to democratize Taiwan. And I think, first of all, martial law was lifted in 1987, and for the newspapers, they could publish as many pages as they want. They used to be restricted to only 12 pages, right? And, well, sometimes people think 12 pages is enough. But, of course, that was lifted in 1988. On the 13th of January 1988, Jiang Jingguo passed away. But when Lee Teng-hui took over and then continued the process of democratization, so we make laws for the establishment of political groups, and gradually we extend that to the election of the new legislative yuan and the National Assembly, and eventually we passed the law and changed the constitution that we can freely elect our own president in 1996. So in the process, Jiang Jingguo expressed a very strong tendency to become as democratic as possible. I remember one day, after I made the translation for him, he suddenly asked me to stay for a while. So he asked me, he said, "Ying-jeou, what is the translation of 戒严, the martial law?" I told him what I know. He said, "Go find out from all the dictionaries, encyclopedias," which I did. I looked up the Encyclopedia Britannica, Encyclopedia Americana, Black's Law Dictionary, Webster's Dictionary, all kinds. And I went back to him 2 days later and told him, he said, "What it is, what the Westerners see this problem." I said, "Well, martial law in some dictionary or encyclopedia means no law at all. And sometimes says it's military control." And he said, "It's not military control. We don't have military control for quite a while." I think at the time he began thinking about whether we should still keep the martial law. Just very interesting, for a few months later, he received a letter from General Ceccarella. Ceccarella is an Italian-American who used to be a general after Normandy invasion, and he was a very brave person. They actually caught a German marshal by himself. So he was decorated. He became a very close friend of Jiang Jingguo because he served as the chief of the American Military Advisory Group. And his wife taught English to Jiang Jingguo. So Jiang Jingguo speaks a little English. When General Checkleda visited Taiwan, usually Jiang Jingguo would not need me for translation. He would talk to him. So I got a letter from General Checkleda, handwritten. He raised a very interesting question. He said, Jingguo, a lot of people talk about your martial law. Do you still believe it is necessary to keep order in Taiwan? Is it worth it? And I also told the president that when people use the word martial law, as I said, it means military control, barbed wires, soldiers walking in the streets with the guns and the tanks rolling in the streets. So he's probably at the time, he thought maybe it's time for us to do something about it. So he made that decision on October the 6th, 1987. So I think this 86. That's a great decision. And in association with that, interestingly, also made a decision to let the resident of Taiwan to visit the mainland for family reunion. That all happened the same year, all right? Martial law was lifted in July 1987, and in November the 2nd, 1987, the ban on travel to the mainland was lifted. It also, he asked me after one session of translation, he said he uses Zhejiang accent of Chinese. He said, Ying-jeou, 最近有没有什么特殊的事情啊? I said, yes. Some members of the Legislative Yuan have already asked the government to let the retired soldiers go to the mainland. Those soldiers, actually, they have been in Taiwan for more than 30 years, didn't have a chance to visit their relatives, and so they wear a long white robe, writing 想家, thinking about my family, and actually had a parade in Ximending in the downtown Taipei. So I said, Mr. President, there are retired soldiers want to go to the mainland to visit their relatives, and some of the legislators, like Zhao Shaokang, Hong Zhaonan, they also support their claim. And he said, go to see Deputy Secretary Zhang Zuyi. I already asked him to take care of these things. I was a little bit surprised. Obviously, he was prepared. So I went to see this Deputy Secretary General, and he said, Ying-jeou, let's work together to write a plan. And the idea to use Red Cross as the intermediary, and so that the government has not to be involved. So I submit my memorandum to the president on June 4th, also June 4th. It was 1987. And it was quickly approved. And he gave that to the Premier, Yu Guohua, in order to make it a policy to be effective on November the 2nd. So that started another revolutionary between Taiwan and the mainland. So it gradually developed from relative reunion to trade, to investment, to many other things.
You know, when Jiang Jingguo died in early '88, to my surprise, I found myself telling the press some fairly positive things about him. I remembered in '61 when I first got there, people told me, this man is a killer. He was heading the secret police, and he was a vicious person, instrument of brutal dictatorship. And by January '88, he had evolved into what seemed to me an enlightened person who was making the transition possible at its start. And of course, when you were his interpreter, Jingguo used his good judgment in helping to get your Harvard Law School classmate, Annette Liu Sholian, out of prison. Annette had been one of the Kaohsiung 8 convicted after Human Rights Day of 1979 and sentenced to prison for 12 years. I had felt deeply guilty at my inability to get her out, especially since I was known to be supporting normalization of relations with Beijing. And I couldn't think of how to get her out, even though I'd written some things in the press about it, etc. And then there was a famous murder in California. Henry Liu, October 15th, 1984, was the Jiangnan Ming-an. He was assassinated, and that led to a terrific uproar. And I thought, here's an opportunity. Maybe we can use this as a way to get Annette out. And I went to see Ying-jeou. He was then Deputy Secretary General, one of them, of the Kuomintang, as well as interpreter. And I said, it would be a wonderful step forward in the KMT's necessary effort to rehabilitate its reputation after this ghastly assassination, to let her out. And he said to me, come back in 10 days. And I came back in 10 days, and he and I went to the prison hospital.
It's not a prison hospital, it's a 三种, it's a 三军总医院. It's a hospital for the military people, not a prison. But I know you couldn't tell.
I couldn't. Not only couldn't I tell, I wasn't told.
No, the place I arranged a meeting between Professor Cohen and Liu Xiulian was in the meeting room of patients and their relatives. So it was quite a touching moment because Liu Xiulian didn't have the chance to go out for her mother's funeral, so he felt very sad. And he has a problem with cancer, so he was at the lowest point of his life. And Professor Cohen really gave him a lot of encouragement. And
well, you were instrumental in getting her out because I came back another 10 days later, and you announced she would be released. You obviously had persuaded Jingguo it was good for Taiwan to let her out. And the only thing was, the condition was she'd have to spend another year at Harvard Law School to get her out of the country. But that was a benefit to all of us, I think. Well, that was a great specific case. But let's talk about your own regime, your own 8 years. I always thought that you didn't get enough credit. You got a huge amount of criticism at home, of course, because of those 20-odd agreements you managed to make with the mainland. I always thought that was one of the overlooked international diplomatic feats. You managed to make favorable agreements to Taiwan on an equal footing with the mainland, despite their traditional stand that they would never negotiate on an equal footing with Taiwan because you were a mere province of China. And yet, through imaginative, persistent efforts, you made a huge contribution to international security and U.S.-China relations, U.S.-Taiwan relations. And I always felt that that should have gotten sufficient recognition to be considered for a Nobel Peace Prize nomination. Now, maybe my standards were low. After all, they gave Obama the Peace Prize before he did anything. And some of the other recipients were not exactly distinguished, but I thought this was a serious contribution, and it could still justifiably be recognized. Now, when I told that to the Taiwan media, one of my former students from Taiwan who had pledged $1 million toward a chair in my name at NYU Law School canceled the gift. Sounds funny, but when she sent me a message saying, I'm sure you were misquoted, I wrote back, no, it's a no-brainer if you know anything about international relations. And Could you tell us how did you manage to do this with the mainland?
Well, when I first took office in 2008, we have a lot of challenges ahead. The cross-strait relations was at its lowest point, almost on the verge of conflict. And our relations with the United States was also full of trouble because of lack of high-level trust. So the first thing I did to restore high-level trust with the U.S. was a policy particularly on a low-key and surprise-free, 低调, 零意外, to make sure that we can rebuild our mutual trust. On the mainland side, as you know, that the key question, the same as today, the 92 consensus. We reached that consensus with the mainland in 1992. The consensus is surrounding around the so-called One China principle. It was done in November, but 3 months earlier, when President Li Denghui himself convened the National Unification Council to consider the question of One China. The mainland side says, look, now you have so many people in the mainland meeting with relatives, we should discuss what One China means. So Li Denghui was quite responsive by holding that meeting, talking about what is One China. Eventually, the resolution was both sides of the Taiwan Strait insist on the One China principle.
What is the One China principle?
I'm going to tell you.
Oh, good.
And both sides insist that they adhere to that. But they obviously give the China different definitions. And for Mainland China, One China is the People's Republic of China. And Taiwan is will become their special administrative zone after unification. But for Taiwan, One China is Republic of China, established in 1912. And now still their territory, constitutional territory, comprise all of China, but we only have governing authorities on Taiwan, pescatories, Jinmen, and Mazu. So it's a long resolution. It's a very important one. That was August the 1st. 3 months later, when the two sides met in Hong Kong, on the Taiwan side is the Strait Exchange Foundation, 海基会. On the mainland side is Association for Relations Across the Taiwan Strait, 海协会. They met in Hong Kong, but didn't come out with any consensus initially. So they went home. But 3 days later, the SAF, 海基会, made another proposal. The proposal said, while striving for the unification of China, the two sides of the Taiwan Strait, while adhering to the One China principle, have different understandings. So they could interpret One China separately in oral statement. 两岸都坚持一个中国的原则，但认知有所不同，可以用口头的方式呢各自表达。So that was a very important agreement. So we didn't know whether the other side would accept, but actually it is beyond our expectation. On the 16th of November, the 海协会 sent back a fax saying that we fully respect and accept your proposal. All right? So the next day, the newspaper report that some says this is 各说各话. Each one speaks his own thoughts. And there's one newspaper that says it is 一中各表, One China, respective interpretations. And that report was actually followed by other newspapers. But at the time, the word 92 consensus did not emerge yet. It was actually named by the chairman of the Mainland Affairs Council in the year 2000 after the KMT already lost to the mainland, he said maybe we can call that consensus 92 consensus. So it was named 92 consensus. It doesn't mean that it created that. The consensus already created. I was a little bit surprised at the time because as vice chairman, senior vice chairman of the Mainland Affairs Council, I believe the mainland made a special effort to do that, fully respect and accept that. And so that was a good beginning. And
that was the basis for the cross-strait agreements.
That's right. And even before that, in April 1993, in other words, 5 months after the consensus was reached, we were able to arrange a meeting between the head of the 海基会, CF Ku, Gu Zhenfu 先生, and then the 海协会, it's Wang Daohan. These two people met in Singapore and actually agreed 4 agreements as a result. That was very encouraging. It showed that the 92 consensus worked. But unfortunately, ever since then, the consensus was enabled to solve a lot of problems, such as 千岛湖事件. It's a tourist attraction in Zhejiang province. 24 Taiwanese tourists were robbed and killed. So the Deng Hui Zongteng was furious. He condemned the mainland. So that was the first discord of cross-strait relations. That was in 1994. And then in 1995, President Li Denghui came to the United States to his alma mater, Cornell University, and made a speech. The mainland China was really, they got crazy. They condemned his trip. So when in next year, Taiwan has its first election, popular election for the president, and Mr. Li Denghui was a KMT candidate, mainland China decided to test the guided missile. They sent one missile to the offshore areas of Keelung, and then the other one in Kaohsiung, testing the missile. And that caused a lot of panic in Taiwan. So the relationship was really in a very bad situation. Next year, the following year, Gu Zhenfu, the chairman of the SAF, went to the mainland trying to mend the fences. And Wang Daohan said, okay, I will visit Taiwan in 1999. So everybody was very happy. But just before he started a trip to Taiwan, President Li Denghui had an interview with Radio Germany. And it says the relationship between Taiwan and the mainland is a special state-to-state relations. So that is the beginning of the two-state theory. And the mainland side was also very unhappy about that, and Wang Daohan canceled his trip. So ever since then, the institutionalized negotiation between the two instrumentalities, 海基会 and 海协会, came to a stop. Not resumed until I became president.
2008.
2008. But even before I took office, it was a very interesting episode before that. The General Secretary Hu Jintao had a telephone conversation with President Bush over the phone. And Hu Jintao says, in a very interesting way, he says, the Chinese mainland wanted to restore the talks and consultations with Taiwan under the 92 consensus. The first time a mainland Chinese leader used that word, which recognized one China, but differ on its definition. So this is almost a verbatim version of the 92 consensus. I couldn't believe in my eyes. I thought, it got to be wrong, you know. So but it was released by the New China News Agency, which is official news agency of mainland China. But curiously, they only have the English version, no Chinese version. Obviously, 内外有别.
Yeah. I want to now turn to the question period from the audience, but I don't want to do that before just making two quick notes. One is President Tsai Ing-wen, your successor, has been struggling with the insistence by Beijing that she formally adhere to the 1992 consensus. And while she's been reaching out to claim there'll be no change in the status quo that it has existed under your government, she refuses to say the magic words. And what seems to be at stake, as many of you know, is she doesn't want to lose the support of many of her supporters who feel if you acknowledge the 92 consensus, you're giving up the right that someday there could be an independent Taiwan. That's what it's all about. Is Taiwan necessarily always going to be deemed under the government of a China? But the second point I want to mention is you've never had much credit, and you've never sought much credit for all the accomplishments of your 8 years for human rights. You did a lot. It was under your government that finally the legislature and the executive and the court system working together really abolished the Taiwan equivalent of Laodong Jiaoyang, re-education through labor, the right of the police to administer punishment, to jail people without the formal protections of the criminal justice system. That was I wrote a book about it, as you know, because I was so impressed by what was done. Even more important, under your government, you adopted the two international human rights covenants, two major covenants, even though Taiwan hasn't been permitted to deposit ratification with the UN because you're no longer represented in the UN. Your government proceeded to implement those covenants through legislation and administrative action and now court interpretation. This is a great achievement, and it's really twice now a group of international specialists, as you know, has been asked by Taiwan to come in and review the progress. You can't have your people go to Geneva and get the usual UN review, but you've done an even better review in Taiwan. I don't want to overlook that.
Well, it's a very interesting question because the Republic of China actually signed the two international covenants, first one on civil and political rights, the second one on economic, social, and cultural rights in 1967. But actually 4 years later, we lost our representation in the United Nations.
And you hadn't ratified them in the interim.
No, so we didn't get a chance to ratify. The DPP, when it was in power, tried, but unable to do that. So when I took office in 2008, I announced it on December the 10th, the Human Rights Day, International Human Rights Day. I said, I will ratify the two covenants in 1 year. So in the next year, in May, I actually signed the instrument of ratification. According to the two covenants, we have to send the signed instrument of ratification to the UN Secretariat, and then we will become a party. But when I did that, I knew we will not be able to actually do it. This will be rejected because we lost the representation. So in preparation for that, we actually passed an implementation statute, which make the two covenants part of our domestic law, so that our courts and all the government agencies could apply that. And we have used that to other international human rights treaties, like the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the CEDAW, and relating to the disabled people with children, and on corruption. So in order to make up the lost opportunities to become parties to an international convention or treaty, we use that mechanism. And just because of that, we have to follow the requirement of the two international covenants to make a report on Taiwan's human rights situation. And normally, as Jerry says, the review conference would take place in Geneva. But obviously, we couldn't do that. So we did it in Taipei 3 years ago when he was first invited to come. Actually, what we did was even better because we invited top 10 human rights experts from the whole world to Taipei. And then we had a conference between the experts and the government agencies focusing on the Taiwan Human Rights Report. And even on top of that, we invite the local NGOs for this purpose. In other words, the local NGOs had the opportunity to exchange views with their international counterparts and also with government officials. So we were able to have a very lively debate or discussion in Taipei. The specialist said this format is probably even better than doing that either in Geneva or New York, where you didn't have the advantage of meeting the local people. So we will continue to do that and hoping we will gradually enhance Taiwan human rights development. Well, thanks very much for Jerry Cohen's support of that, because he actually loves the decision of our Council of Grand Justice 大法官会议 to make the 减速流氓条例unconstitutional. So we have to change that. And that is a great advancement in protection of human rights. So I'm sure you're aware that the Freedom House in New York City actually published reports on the freedom situation of all kinds of countries. Before we had direct presidential elections, we had been characterized as a partly free country. It's not free. It's not free. It's partly free. But after we did that in 1996, we become a full free country. And just lately, last month, in January, they published the 2017 survey of the freedom situation around the world. Taiwan, on the political rights section, we become first grade. And on the civil liberties section, used to be second grade, but now promoted to first grade. So the total score is 91. We're slightly better than that of the United States. The United States 89. We're not 91, first time. So we are very happy that Taiwan has become a country with so much freedom. But we still have to be very careful because, as you know, government used to be the most likely entity to have human rights violations. So I keep telling my officials when I was president, you have to watch what you did to our people and hoping that we will continue to be a free country in the world.
Well, now we have a lot of good questions, and the first one I want to ask relates to a question I had hoped to put to you at some point, which is, what is the role of the Kuomintang? What is the future of your party that seems to be in such disarray at the moment? Now, that's just the background for this question, which is more specific and interesting. How can the KMT adjust its policies to reflect the declining levels of Chinese identity among Taiwanese citizens, while adhering to its core principles and values? This is interesting. Chinese identity is slipping in Taiwan. How should the KMT adjust its policies consistent with its core principles and values? Now, I don't know what that reference refers to, core principles and values, but I assume it means continuing assertion that Taiwan is ruled by a government of China. But tell us how you deal with the problem of diminishing feeling of Taiwanese that they're Chinese.
In a way, this question has long been handled by our Constitution. The Constitution is the only one constitution across the Taiwan Strait that was adopted by 500 million Chinese back in 1947, and never before. And in that process, Taiwan actually sent 17 representatives to Nanjing in order to adopt that constitution. That is why, no matter what happened in Taiwan, we could modify, we could change the constitution, but never stop using the constitution. And the constitution is the one China constitution for sure, because at the time, 1947, there wasn't another China.
And President Tsai endorses that constitution.
Yes, she did. She does. And also, according to the amendment to the Constitution, it says the Constitution amendments were adopted in coping with the situation before the unification of the country. It doesn't mean that it doesn't set a deadline for unification, but it never excludes the option or the possibility of unification. And in Article 11 of the amendment, the amendments look very much like the U.S. Constitution. They were actually appendixed to the original Constitution. Article 11 says that the free area and the mainland area are the two areas in the Republic of China. And for problems of legal nature, the government could enact new legislation to deal with the rights and obligation of citizens. So that's a very important article, recognize the reality of the Taiwan Strait. In other words, put it in a simple word, it's one Republic of China, two areas. And we also enact a law says the statute governing the relations of the Taiwan area and the mainland area. So we call it the Mainland Relations Act. So President Tsai Ing-wen says very clearly she adhered to this, to the Constitution and the statute. But the problem with Mainland China is they insist the Tsai government has to accept the 92 consensus, one China, respective interpretations. But so far, that has not happened. Well, actually, as I described a while ago, this was actually our country's, the Taiwan side wanted it, and the mainland side accepted. It's not the mainland side who imposed that on Taiwan, because I was the senior vice chairman of the Mainland Affairs Council, overseeing the negotiation. I knew that very well. So it takes some time to see whether either side could make some change. So when you're talking about this Chinese identity, I don't worry too much about that. You know, when you ask in an ordinary poll of the people in Taiwan, are you Taiwanese or Chinese? Most likely they will say Taiwanese. But if you ask them, do you consider yourself a member of the Chinese nation, 中华民族? Sometimes 80% of people say yes. You know, so it really depends on how you ask the question.
Well, and it depends on the implications of the answer. You could say, yes, I'm a member of Chinese ethnic background. How do you translate that, you see? Or you could say, I'm a Chinese citizen. And it's a conflict between your ethnic background and your citizenship. It's one that we should be familiar with if we're interested in American history, of course. So how you ask the question about these polls, and that's the problem with a referendum, is crucial.
Yeah, we do have opinion polls of the different natures. So particularly when you ask people, what does Taiwan independence mean? A lot of people think, well, we're independent now. We elect our own president. We elect our own parliament, and we run our own business. So 6 years ago, when I was first interviewed by Christiana Amarpour of CNN, the first question he posed to me is that, Mr. President, why don't you just declare Taiwan's independence? I said, Christiana, have you ever heard a country declaring independence twice? We are an independent country back in 1912, and this year we celebrate our centennial. How can I declare independence again? And it depends from whom. You all have that kind of questions. So I think it's very, actually at the moment in Taiwan, Mainland China or in Taiwan Strait, actually I believe there's no need to declare independence of Taiwan, and it is not going to succeed. So actually, there are only two options the people of Taiwan faces. One is maintaining the status quo. The other is reunification with the mainland. But for that to happen, we still have a relatively long way to go. Mainland China and Taiwan still have a lot of differences that takes time to resolve, or at least to manage. So if the conditions are not right for reunification, well, we can always stay at the status quo. But you have to understand the word independence have two different meanings. One is autonomy. You run your own government. You elect your own president, your own parliament. And another meaning is separation. You want to be separated from the concept of China or mainland China. That's very different. So as long as you don't go separatist, but you maintain your autonomy, maintain the status quo, and keep unification as a potential option, I think that is probably the best way for Taiwan to survive. There's no reason for mainland to attack Taiwan because we could not solve or manage all the problems we have. But actually, we do have a lot of differences. For someone like myself, trying my best to bring peace to Taiwan Strait, we have a concluded 23 agreement. But when we discuss a very political issue with the mainland, setting up offices in Taiwan and the mainland, representing the governing authorities in order to take care of the interests of the people, they seem to be a little bit reluctant. First of all, for offices we set up in mainland China, they are afraid that we will use that to integrate, interchange with foreign embassies in mainland China, maybe to try to get some benefit from that. And for their offices in Taiwan, they are free. If there's a student movement, they are very much afraid the people will be in danger. So if you can see, it's not that easy to say, I have no ulterior motives for this. I'm not trying to set up a consulate general in any city of mainland China. But for our officers in mainland, they must have the right for humanitarian visit for people, Taiwanese people in mainland Chinese jail. Well, this is something we have to do.
Well, this is what Ying-jeou, Chun, and I at NYU were studying, the prospects for improving judicial cooperation and providing greater criminal justice protection for people on Taiwan who get locked up in the mainland. So many people on Taiwan are afraid to go to the mainland, and now some mainland people are becoming afraid to go to Taiwan for one reason or another. But I'm impressed by the fact the questions that we have here are mainly concerned with economics. I'm slightly disappointed because I'm less interested in economics than human rights, but it's my duty to ask. I'm going to put three of them together, and that will dispose of them. One is the general question: how do you feel about the future of Taiwan's economy? Then we get three specific questions, all relating to innovation. This one says, can Taiwan compete in terms of high-tech innovation? The next question says, why did Taiwan lose its innovation mojo, and how can it get it back? It's quite interesting. And then the third is very specific and current. How will the Trump decision to withdraw from the TPP affect Taiwan's trade with the global economy and with the U.S.? So tell us about your views of the current situation of Taiwan's economy and the issues of innovation, TPP, and other relevant aspects.
Okay, let me first give you a general report on Taiwan's economy. Well, according to IMF 2016, Taiwan's per capita GDP on the basis of PPP, purchasing power parity, is $47,790 US. And actually, that makes us the 22nd highest country in the world. Compared to 2008, when I first took office, it was 32. So we advanced 10 places. And you must be, I'm sure you will be surprised. That figure, 22nd, we are ahead of Great Britain, France, Italy, Denmark, Canada, Japan, and Korea. But we are behind Singapore and Hong Kong because it's the PPP, it's not nominal GDP. And actually, we have a foreign exchange reserve of roughly $440 billion US. We're number 5 in the world. So we still have a very robust economy. But our problem is when President Trump says we'll pull out of TPP, I think we're the first victim. Why? Because we have tried very hard to get in, and we hope we could become a negotiator in the second round of negotiations. But now it's all gone. So we don't know whether we could use the RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, as a substitute. But if our relation with the mainland was like now, I doubt very much that we can make it. Why we are so eager to participate in regional economic integration? Because this aspect is our weakest point. We joined the World Trade Organization in 2002. It was very important to us because of our diplomatic isolation. We need organizations like WTO to get a free ride. As you know, when they have multilateral negotiations like the Kennedy round, the Uruguay round, so we can become part of it. But once the international mechanism does not work anymore, like the Doha round, actually not getting anywhere. So we have to go back to bilateral arrangement like FTA, free trade agreement. But before I took office, we have four free trade agreements with 5 Central American countries. Looks very good for them, but not so much for us because that total trade accounts for less than 1% of our trade. So we want to get more. But during my term of office, we were able to get one with the mainland, the Economic Cooperation Framework Agreement, ECFA. But we only complete the early harvest part. They deal with roughly 500 different goods. So it's just about 5% of the total. It's an incomplete FTA. And we have one with New Zealand and Singapore, which is pretty good because these 2 countries, they are sort of members of the OPEC. It's OECD, and they are relatively advanced. But other than these 3, we didn't have any. So for our export goods, only 10% are covered by FTA or similar arrangement.
And is China an obstacle to future FTAs?
Well, as I said, you mean Mainland China?
Yeah.
Well,
Beijing.
Yeah. Thank you for letting me know. Well, actually, as I said, ECFA is FTA, but we only complete the early harvest, 早收, early harvest part. It's just about less than 10% of the total. And we didn't have the chance to complete the whole thing before I stepped down. It's really a pity. And our trade in service agreement was blocked by the DPP. And so far, nothing happened yet.
Will that be approved by the legislature?
We hope so. But so far, almost a year, nothing happened. Why was that so important to us? Because, as you know, Our export to mainland China and Hong Kong combined account for roughly 40% when I took office. It was 24% before President Chen Shui-bian took office. So actually, it was a large increase. So everybody expect that during my administration, the figure 40% could go up to 50%. That's not the case. By the time I stepped down, the figure 40% actually went down to 39%. Why? Because I always said, people suggest that don't put all your eggs in one basket. That's fine. But mainland China is the biggest basket of the world. You can really leave nothing on that bag. So what I did is we tried to diversify our export destination, like Southeast Asia. Our trade with South Asia, export with Southeast Asia, used to account for only 14% of our total trade. And so in my administration, we raised that to 18%. And 40% of trade with mainland and Hong Kong went down to 39%. I think we'll continue to do that in order to make a balance. But you got to understand, there are 23 countries or economies around mainland China. 17 of them use mainland China as their biggest trading partner. So it is only natural to have relatively high percentage of trade with the mainland. And Taiwan
is
special.
We have to draw to a close soon, but I don't want to leave out the last two questions because you are still a professor. You believe in training the young people of your country and ours, and these both are concerned with the future and what young people can do. What is your advice to young people who want to help improve mutual understanding between mainland and Taiwan? Second one is quite similar. What is your assessment of relations between Taiwan and mainland China now? And it's written by a graduate student studying law at NYU, I'm proud to say.
Well, I think this is a good question. Let me first let you know how I see the exchange of students between Taiwan and mainland. I'm sure you all are aware of a very important war in Europe, the Prussia-Franco War of 1870. And of course, France lost the war, and their casualties about 6 times that of Prussia. And France actually ceded 2 provinces to Prussia, the Pulushi, Alsace and Lorraine. So the story happened in the province of Alsace. An elementary school student who loved to quit school. But one day, he received a letter from his school asking him to go to the class the day after tomorrow. There will be an important announcement. So the student went to class feeling very uneasy. Then he saw the teacher wearing his Sunday sort of dress, and there are local leaders in the university, in the school. The teacher says, "My students, this is your last French class. Beginning tomorrow, only German will be taught." And he said, "French is the most beautiful language in the world." And he wrote in the blackboard, "Viva la France," and said, "Go home." That story was written by the famous French writer Alphonse Daudet. And it was introduced into China in the 1930s by Hu Shizhi. It touched the heart of millions of people, generations of people. It was very famous. But what happened to Germany and France after that? They fought each other for almost a century. So after World War II, the visionary leaders of 2 sides decided we got to do something different. So they decided to engage each other in a massive student exchange. Thousands of French students went to Germany, have a home stay, and the other way around. And it worked miracles. So Germany and France become close friends, and they become cornerstone of the European unity. In 1993, when I was traveling in Europe, I suddenly read my International Herald Tribune saying that Germany and France have decided to abandon their proud currency, French franc and German Deutsche Mark, in favor of the euro. I was deeply touched, because for me it was just saying it's impossible. These two countries are so proud of their currency, and they decided to do that. And that makes this European unity possible. And so if you look at what happened in Europe in the last maybe 10, 20 years, every time there's a crisis, I think the German-French Union solidarity plays a very important role, like the European debt, everything. So that gave us a very important lesson. If we want to have sustainable peace across Taiwan Strait, we should let the young people of the two sides to get to know each other as soon and as many as possible. So I was the one more than 10 years ago to open up our doors to many students. So during my presidency, when I went to the campuses, I was so encouraged by students from the mainland Taiwan. They are studying together, debate together, and play together, and have a lot of interesting encounters. And we found that they found each other very different from the impression they got before. So it was very interesting getting together. So when I remember, before I run for president, usually Mainland China normally took a very harsh attitude toward Taiwan's democracy. The year 2000, the year 2004, and even the 2008, where I won, but I understand that the Mainland China prepared something in case I didn't win, that they probably will take some action. One interesting episode is that the employees of AIT in Taipei, everyone canceled their leave in order to prepare just in case of anything happened. But nothing happened.
Of course, in order to really get peace in Northeast Asia, you not only have to do the kinds of things you've suggested between the mainland and Taiwan, but you have to take account of Korea and especially Japan. I was in France 1951-52 as a Fulbright student. I certainly witnessed the kind of development that brought about this wonderful change in Europe. And I think so much more has to be done with the various players in Northeast Asia. And I noticed that last week when I met with the representatives of your government to discuss the arrangements for your trip, they selected a nice French restaurant on the Upper East Side called Café d'Alsace. It was about Alsatian food from the province of Alsace-Lorraine, and I began to think, now these Chinese are subtle people. You've given us a great evening. I have one last question. Do you want to say something?
I haven't finished my talk yet.
Of course.
I got to tell you a very interesting story. When I was running for my re-election in 2011 and 2012, I was astonished to find the mainland authority permitting mainland to use internet to watch my campaign trail. And I understand that one episode is that I went to a local traditional market I extend my hand for a handshake with the vendor, but that guy obviously is a DPP supporter. He refused. So it was shown on the mainland Chinese internet. I was quite impressed. So on the day when, the 14th of January, the result shows I won, I think one international press visited two students, one from mainland China and the other from Taiwan. And, they said, they asked the two students, how do you think about the election? The Taiwanese student said, look, our electoral system is very efficient. Our voters cast their vote in the morning, and they know the results in the evening. Very efficient. And the mainland student said, oh, that's nothing. At home, we also vote, cast the vote in the morning, but we know the result the day before.
Just one final word.
No, I think this is a tremendous, interesting sense of humor of the mainland students. You can see that they got on very well. This is something quite encouraging.
You know, these questions reveal an understandable concern on the part of the younger generation about what can you do with your life to have meaning? And what are you going to do when you grow up? Now, to me, you're still a youngster. And I ask you that question. You could be a Lee Kuan Yew. You could be a Tony Blair. You could take after other retired leaders, play golf, work for Citibank.
I don't know how.
But I think you've given us the answer to what you're going to be doing, in part by being here and giving us this fine talk. But what role do you see for yourself in the future?
Well, it's a very good question. But it is something like a state secret. I don't want to tell you. No. Well, I teach a course in Suzhou University, and I have
What's
a lot of invitations on international law. And I have a lot of invitations to talk about my experiences. And I think I'm still busy enough. And certainly, I'm thinking about other things. You just made several examples of these people. I hope I'll be better.
Well, you could play a unique role in terms of fostering relations with the mainland,
right,
and improving relations in Northeast Asia, letting the world know about Taiwan. I've been telling the story recently that appeared in the New York Times just before the famous Trump phone call with President Tsai, where the journalist asked an American woman, "What do you think about Taiwan?" And she said, "I love Thai food." So that's the problem. And Americans may be faced with some crucial questions about our relations to Taiwan. But you've given us a tremendous amount to chew on tonight. Many, many thanks.
Thank you very much.
Great.
I enjoy very much.